In 1 Samuel chapter 17, we find the very, very famous story of Goliath and David. And of course, Goliath has been out trudging through the valley of Elah for several weeks, demanding, threatening, challenging the people of God to come out into the valley and fight with him. And of course, there's been no takers. Nobody is willing to go down and to fight this giant. And in fact, they're running away from him, hiding in caves, the Bible tells us, and refusing to accept the giant's challenge. Well, finally, we see that a young man, and we pick up the story in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 20, we see that David, the Bible says, rose up early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. So Jesse had sent David on the errand to bring some food, bring some cheese and bread and other things for his brothers and for some of the leading military men in Israel. So David ends up, he hears Goliath. We read about that in verse 23. And verse 24, it said, all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. So David's watching this scenario for the first time. The men of Israel are running, they're fleeing. The enemies of God are in the valley demanding for a conflict. And David's going, what in the world's going on here? Well, he picked it up pretty quickly. There was a war raging, and Goliath was humiliating God's people. Not only God's people, but he was humiliating and defacing the name of God in the earth. So what would David do? And David begins to ask, verse 26, we pick up the story. David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? So David issued the challenge. He said, what's going to be done with this guy? Somebody's got to go down and face him. And what will be the reward for the person that does? Well, of course, he's told, and verse 28, Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride, the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. Clearly, Eliab didn't have any good things to say about his brother. He's accusing him of leaving the sheep. He's accusing him of being proud and arrogant. So he's throwing all kinds of labels on his youngest brother. And David's response is quite revealing. Verse 29, David said, what have I now done? Why are you getting on my back? What is your problem, Eliab? Why are you charging me with all of these evils? And then David asks the question. He says, is there not a cause? Isn't there a reason why David would ask What will be done to the man who kills this uncircumcised Philistine? Is there not a cause, friend? Is there not reason for David to speak up in this moment of crisis in the history of God's people? All of God's people were running. Saul was nowhere to be found. He was in his tent. He wasn't going down into the valley. And the rest of the Israelites were scattered over the hillsides. Nobody was going down. Wasn't there a reason for David to speak up? Nobody else was. Nobody else would say a word about what was going on. And no one else would dare to go into the valley. Is there not a cause, friends, today? You know, some of the tapes that we do on our YouTube channel, I would assume maybe more than a few. I would say maybe many of the tapes that we do on our YouTube channel get a lot of attention. Some of it is very positive, and some of it is very negative. Some people get very, very angry. Some people begin to attack us with epitaphs and names and labeling us. I don't know how many times we've been referred to as hateful, critical, divisive, troublemakers. Hate, angry, that we're angry people. My question that I would ask is there not a cause? Is there not reason for us today to be alarmed at what's going on amongst us as a people? Just as David was at the Valley of Elah? Why are people throwing barbs at us when all we're doing is simply pointing out what's going on? Is it because people just want to put their head into the sand? Is it because people don't want to acknowledge the fact that there are problems among God's professed people, that somehow God's professed people that are still within the organized work, that they're somehow going to go on to the kingdom regardless of what's going on in the church? I think we have to ask ourselves questions, friends. Why is it that people get mad at what we say? Why is it that people call us all kinds of hateful names? Is there not a cause, friend? Is there not a cause? I want to look this morning at a statement, and I want to do this over the next several times we're together. I want to look at a statement from 1 Testimonies, page 578. 1 Testimonies, page 578. We read, "That night I dreamed that I was in Battle Creek, looking out from the side glass at the door, and saw a company marching up to the house, 2 and 2. They looked stern and determined. I knew them well, and turned to open the parlor door to receive them, but thought I would look again. The scene was changed. The company now presented the appearance of a Catholic procession. One bore in his hand a cross, another a reed. And as they approached, the one carrying a reed made a circle around the house, saying 3 times, 'This house is prescribed. The goods must be confiscated. They have spoken against our holy order. Terror seized me. I ran through the house, out of the north door, and found myself in the midst of a company, some of whom I knew, but I dared not speak a word to them for fear of being betrayed. I tried to seek a retired spot where I might weep and pray without meeting eager, inquisitive eyes wherever I turned. I repeated frequently, if I could only understand this, if they will tell me what I have said or what I have done. And then Ellen White says, I wept and prayed much as I saw our goods confiscated. I tried to read sympathy or pity for me in the looks of those around me, and marked the countenances of several whom I thought would speak to me and comfort me if they did not fear that they would be observed by others. I made one attempt to escape from the crowd, but seeing that I was watched, I concealed my intentions. I commenced weeping aloud, saying, if they would only tell me what I've done or what I've said. My husband, who was sleeping in a bed in the same room, heard me weeping aloud and awoke me. My pillow was wet with tears, and a sad depression of spirits was upon me. Now that's taken again from 1 Testimonies, page 578. Friends, there is something very interesting about this dream that Ellen White had, this vision that she had. I know of no other situation or circumstance in the spirit of prophecy that didn't have fulfillment in Ellen White's time. But friends, this experience that Ellen White is describing here did not happen in her life. This statement is for another time, down at the end of time. And the people who will go through this experience, it's not Ellen White. It's those living upon whom the ends of the world are come. A Catholic procession. The people that came up to Ellen White's home were clearly Seventh-day Adventists. Ellen White told us in this passage, she said, I knew them well and turned to open the parlor door to receive them, but thought I would look again. So friend, Ellen White is describing Seventh-day Adventists, and they're coming up to her house, and she knew them. She knew who they were. She said they looked stern and determined. And then she turned to look again at this procession coming up towards her house. And she tells us the company now presented the appearance of a Catholic procession. One bore in his hand a cross, another a reed. Friends, these are former Seventh-day Adventists. These are conference. These are Seventh-day Adventists who have not left the church, but have embraced all that Rome loves and all that Rome teaches and believes. So Ellen White's describing an experience that God's people will face at the end of time. Catholic infiltration in God's last day church. Or as Daniel 11 calls it, the King of the North entering the glorious land. Because that's exactly what we have here, friends. The papacy coming in and taking over God's last day church. Now, of course, friends, within that you have the faithful. And the faithful will always go on, and they will always go through to glory. But the great, large class of Seventh-day Adventists will remain in Seventh-day Adventism, but become Roman Catholics and see things exactly as Roman Catholicism does. Is there not a cause, friends? Shouldn't somebody stand up and say something? You know, I've had people say to me, well, you know, Bill, if you wouldn't be so hateful and you wouldn't say such unkind things about people, about pastors, well, we'd like to have you come and speak at our church. Save the invitation, friend. I'm not interested. I want to tell the truth because there is a cause. And David's question, is there not a cause? Is there not reason, friends, to be alarmed, to be wide awake when we see Catholic principles, Catholic teaching, Catholic goals, Catholic directives being implemented and pushed as the agenda for the Seventh-day Adventist denominational church? Is there not a cause, friends? Now, if you say, well, no, Bill, there's nothing wrong. Well, then, friend, if that's your conclusion, then just keep your head dipped in the sand. In fact, just totally immerse your head and your neck completely in the sand. Now, friends, why is it that Goliath's in the valley screaming? We've got a Catholic procession in Seventh-day Adventism today, and nobody says anything. Very few say anything about it. Let me phrase it that way. Very few say anything about it, as if everything is okay. Friends, Ellen White said that Catholicism would so permeate Seventh-day Adventism, they would take it over. That's what this statement in First Testimonies, page 578, is telling us. It goes on and it says, this house is prescribed, the goods must be confiscated. They have spoken against our holy order. What? What was the problem with the Whites and what was in their home? They had spoken against our holy order. They had spoken against the papacy. They had spoken against the inroads of Catholicism into the church. And so now they were going to be punished with the confiscation of their goods. Ellen White never experienced this vision, friends, this dream. This one awaited God's people down at the end of time. So friends, should you and I be alert to watch out for the invasion of Rome amongst us as a people. If Ellen White talks about this Catholic procession, should we not be alarmed and wide awake if anything Roman infiltrates into the church? And if it comes in, friend, at the highest levels of Seventh-day Adventism, is there not a cause? Should we not stand up and protest and fight, friends, with everything we have to drive it out? Is there not a cause, friend? Now think with me for a moment. Do we have in Seventh-day Adventism today any elements where we can look and say, you know, that's not how Seventh-day Adventists used to be. That's not how Seventh-day Adventists used to teach. These are completely new and different things. Now let's take a few examples. What about spiritual formation? Spiritual formation, from a book written by lawyer Lewis Walton, a brilliant mind. He quoted in his book, it was called Advent, he quoted Malachi Martin, that when somebody takes spiritual formation, which of course are the spirit, it's a derivative of the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola. Malachi Martin said at the end of their training in those exercises, the people become obedient slaves of the Pope. Now, friends, if those exercises lead to obedience to the Antichrist, do you think that's something we should run away from? Do you think that's something we should be alarmed by? Is that not something, friend, that we should rise up and drive out from our midst with everything we have? Should we not scream it from the housetops? Is there not a cause? Well, back in 2001, Rick Warren quoted this in his book, what was it called? Omega 2 or Omega or something? Rick Warren, no, not Rick Warren. Oh, I forgot the guy's name, but he was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor. But he wrote the book and he quoted from the Adventist News Network that in 2001 there was a meeting held by the top officials in the General Conference, and they all voted at that time to have spiritual formation taught to all the thought leaders in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. Pastors, teachers, conference officials, union executives, all the way to the General Conference. Does that alarm you, friends? Does that scare you? Those people have become obedient slaves of the Pope. Are they going to give the third angel's message? That's comical. What are they going to focus on, friends? What will be the message? What will be the message of one who has imbibed who has imbibed spiritual formation. It'll all come down to one thing, friend. Just stay in the church. Stay in the church. That's all that matters. Doesn't matter what you believe. Doesn't matter what you teach. Doesn't matter if you share the truth or not. Just be in the church. Friends, that is the most Roman Catholic of ideas that there is. It's all about the church. Well, one of the people on that committee in 2001 that brought spiritual formation among Seventh-day Adventists was Ted Wilson. What is going on, friends? Ted Wilson was on that committee. Ted Wilson got his doctorate from NYU in religious studies. When I called NYU, they told me that they don't offer that course. They only issue the degree, but that the courses are farmed out to other colleges in the area of NYU. I said, for religious studies, because I called New York University, I said, where would a person go to get those studies? The person's response was they'd most likely go to Fordham. I just about dropped the phone, friends. So at the highest echelons of Seventh-day Adventism is a man who was trained at Fordham University, a Jesuit institution in New York City. Is on the committee to bring spiritual formation to Seventh-day Adventism. Promotes the great hoax. Is okay with ecumenism. For 7 years forgot what the mark of the beast was. And the only reason he changed and told us what it really was, that it was Sunday, was because of pressure, not because of conviction. Friend, is there not a cause? Is there not something that has to be done, friends? Should we not be crying out for the abominations that are being done amongst us as a people? This is an abomination, friends, to have this man in that position. And he is an agent. He is an agent of Rome. And very few will say a word about it, friends. If you do, you're the bad guy. If you do, you're the troublemaker. Stop pointing out that. Don't talk about that. Friends, so much more could be said. During COVID, what stance did the Adventist Church take under the influence and direction of Ted Wilson? They followed the Catholic line, hook, line, and sinker. Hook, line, and sinker. During all these COP 25, 26, 27, 28s, where climate change is being pushed before the world, where do the Seventh-day Adventists stand on that? ADRA, an Adventist agency, is pushing and promoting the climate agenda to the hilt. There's no protest at all, friends. Why? And where will climate change end up? Pope Francis has already let us know in Laudato Si. Will end up in Sunday, friends. Is there not a cause? Is there not a reason to be screaming from the housetops because of what's going on? And very few will say anything? Why? Because they want to protect the church? Friends, if we don't stand for something, we will fall for everything. And we will be blown away. Blown away. Well, we will stop there. In closing, friends, I want you to think and pray and say, Lord, is there not a cause? And when will I stand up and say something? Let us pray. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for your word. Thank you for David, who stood and said, no more, and went down into the valley and fought the monster, and you gave him the victory. Strengthen us, Father, to go into our valleys, to fight our giants, and ultimately to fight the giant of this world in Babylon the Great. In Jesus'